to the idea of building towards the low carbon future and the resources that we have available to help us with some of that. So this is a very different format. We have a series of short presentations and then a discussion where we hope to hear a lot more from the audience around specific questions about, okay, this is great, how do I get started? So let's begin with introducing our panel to this. Again, we've got a delightful North American representation. We're delighted to have Divya Shah from the Canada Infrastructure Bank that has the weighty responsibility of handing the billions of dollars that our federal politicians like to announce periodically towards green infrastructure as part of the both the commitment to Canada's climate targets and also, I think, as part of the overall approach to economic recovery. So, Divya, all three of our panelists are folks that are responsible for making sure all this investment gets spent wisely. Delighted to have Marc Lalonde here from Natural Resources Canada that has the overview of all the federal programming in Canada. And as part of a kind of forward-looking and this idea of community that the executive panel picked up so well, we're thrilled to have Mike Rohan from Northwell Health, who's actively involved in the whole area of New York City's carbon caps and what that could mean, and is this a sign of things to come? Because somehow we're going to have to bridge the gap between 0.2% per year and 3 to 4 to 5% reduction per year. And there's only so many carrots out there that I think Marc and Divya will be talking about somewhere along the way. Some sticks are going to arrive along the way. So we'll have a look and see what that might look like. Mike, when you get to speak, I'm sure you'll give an overview of Northwell Health. That's the biggest healthcare provider in New York and a real leader in the space that we're talking about. So again, we're delighted, Mike, to have you there. So let's, if we may, step along with Divya, and I think we've got your presentation up. So if you can just tell me when to push the button, Divya, and we'll get that story underway.
Amazing. Thank you, Ian, and thank you for having us as a part of this really amazing forum. And I would say it's actually really hard to follow the tall order that the previous panelists and Dr. Balaam set out. Like, I think the messages from all of them are really critical and essential for all of us to listen to. So thank you for that. And hopefully this is a small piece on how, as you mentioned, Ian. So we can go through the slide deck, and as we're going through it, something that I'll say right up front, CIB is a federal crown corporation, but we are one tool in the toolbox. There are many tools, and I think the idea across the board here is to work in collaboration to find fits for everything to achieve the maximum GHG reduction that we can achieve. So keeping that in mind, we can go to the next slide. I think the first couple of slides is just a little bit about CIB. We're a federal crown corporation. As a part of post-COVID economic recovery, we developed a couple of really quick growth plan initiatives. And one of them, as you can see in the middle, right in the middle, is $2 billion that was set aside for building retrofits. But we do have a couple of others like zero emission buses. We focus on agriculture, we focus on clean power and broadband. If we go to the next one, it focuses on the $2 billion in public retrofits, in building retrofits. So something that's really important, that this $2 billion is both across the public sector, so assets that are owned by the public, and it's also across the private sector. So we're working with the entire industry across Canada, and the only thing is it's primarily commercial buildings. We are in the public side, including social housing, but most of the residential is actually not covered in this because there are many other programs within CMHC, within NRCan that actually focus on that pretty efficiently. Our aim is to help finance some of the costs of the retrofits at a subsidized financing rate. And then the idea is to get repaid using GHG reductions, carbon pricing, or through reduction in utility costs, of course. If we go to a couple of slides, I think, yeah, we can go to the next one as well. So I lead as CIB, within CIB, I lead two sectors. One is trade and transport, but that's not what we're here for. We're here for the public sector retrofits initiative. So that is the hat that I wear most of the times. The approach that we're taking from the public side is slightly different, as you may have seen across other funders or financiers. Our approach is actually to work with clients from a top-down perspective. We're not looking at a project that you may have that you want to finance. If you have some of those ready, that's great. But we want to achieve two goals. We actually want to work with all the hospitals to try and see what's your top-down ambition. Think of your deferred maintenance, which typically results in very energy inefficient buildings. Think about your portfolio, think about your end game, and that's what we want to help you achieve, which is a full transformation, working with you from a top-down perspective as on your side of the ledger, rather than on the private side of the ledger coming up with small, retrofit projects that should be done. Another thing from a CIB perspective is our goal is to crowd in some level of private capital alongside us. And this is primarily because we believe there should be an alignment of interests where if they are coming in and building and developing or retrofitting some of the equipment or the buildings, they should take some of the risk on energy performance. And this is pretty normal across the board, but we're just really imbibing that into our approach on financing. So right up front, we believe we should finance majority of this, but we do believe the private capital should come in for a small piece to take the risk. If we go to the next slide, I'm going a little fast because I know we have little time, but Q&A is always more important. Key features. So the idea here, and we've heard this quite a bit today as well, which is the public sector and hospitals per se, they don't have access to capital upfront. Scarcity of capital is always one of the biggest issues that result in deferred maintenance or result in a slower start of going towards carbon neutrality. So our vision is not to have public sector, and if they want, that's great, but as much as possible not to put a burden or fiscal burden on the public sector from an upfront capital contribution perspective. So they should not be worried about I have 5 million left in today's budget, so I can use that 5 million. We want to provide an approach where if capital is not a constraint, what is the transformation hospitals can achieve? And so our idea is that CIB would look to finance anywhere between 40% to 70% of the upfront capital costs, with the private sector financing the rest. And again, we do actually work across the board with provinces and our federal partners on grant funding where available. So we along with the private sector would finance the CapEx, but would be repaid through primarily energy savings. Now, it's a known fact that the deeper you go, savings in utility costs will not pay for all of these CapEx. So something that we need to work through is using more an energy services agreement, or think about costs avoided in the future. So if over the next 30 years, if you have to change your HVAC or the roof anyways, think of that as we're just putting that as a smoothened payment over the life of the project, rather than you actually coming up with that cost up front. Our target sponsors are written here, but primarily we're looking for this audience. Hospitals are very much welcome. We're working with a couple of hospitals already, so we're pretty excited about that. Within the assets, I want to mention that it's hospitals, administrative buildings that the hospitals may have, other campuses, The only caveat at this point in time is long-term care is not included just yet, and primarily just because there's a bunch of different things on coding and different things that are happening right now in the industry. So us coming in and retrofitting just does not fit in the priority of what needs to happen. On an outreach perspective, I just want to spend a couple of seconds there. We work directly with the public sector. So feel free, I look at all the audience here, Ian has my email. Feel free to reach out if you want to have a discussion, if you want to learn more about us. We work directly with the public sector on some of these aspects. We also work with the private sector. You may have private sector that you have already given a mandate to, and those are also great. Come to us if you need financing or you need subsidized approaches on that front. Where it comes to project financing, we are looking, again, because we want to encourage the public sector to think of transformation, we're looking at larger projects, so 40 million and higher. And when we say a project, I mean retrofit typically includes bundles of smaller projects, so we're totally happy with that, or it's a singular $40 million project. But we don't have an upper limit threshold, we just have a lower limit, like the 40 million is important from an administrative cost perspective or to attract private capital. I've already mentioned we would finance anywhere between 40 to 70%, enabling deeper retrofits, fuel switching, and we would, the rest coming from the private sector. The other part is more important here, CIB advisory services. So we recognize that in addition to a capital constraint in the market, there's also a resource constraint from development, feasibility studies, energy audits, and those kind of things. So our view is we need to be, as CIB, a catalyst to help the market figure out some of these things on energy audits, on how do you get to the end result of carbon neutrality. There are certain due diligence items that need to be done first, and we are happy to work with our public clients. We are even funding some of these early costs of energy studies or feasibility costs, primarily because from a perspective as CIB looks at it, if we are a lender, this is a due diligence item for us. So, we're happy to help in some of those cases. Again, it has to lead to a project for an investment for us. Otherwise, it would really not work with the purpose. But we would help you with your business case, financial modeling. There's a bunch of other advisory things that we can provide. We do have a panel of technical advisors, Enerlife is one of them, that we would help use for some of this work as well. So this is just, we're providing a two-pronged approach to our public sector clients. The last slide here is just because we've said there's a 40 limit threshold, that doesn't mean we don't recognize there are smaller projects. Our approach on some of these smaller projects is more trying to find either external aggregators, which are already existing. There are many public sector aggregators. So, you have Efficiency One in Nova Scotia, for instance, that does aggregate some of these things on behalf of the public sector. Instead of municipalities, you have regions. You have other public authorities like Alberta Infrastructure, Infrastructure Ontario, that can also help organize some of these things. The other one I would suggest from hospitals' perspective, especially, you already work on a network with a bunch of other hospitals. We are very happy to work with multiple hospitals as a bundle together to come in to increase the size, create efficiencies. So again, the idea here is that one size doesn't fit all, but we're trying to be as customized as possible. But size is important if we want to make a difference. So I'll leave it at that. I hope this is interesting, and I hope we get to hear from a number of you at a later date. So thank you, Ian. Hope this was quick enough.
It's interesting, Divya, and really important. And the most common response to why aren't you more energy efficient is because we've got no money. I think Dr. Ballum did a good job this morning of saying it's not about money. There's all kinds of money out there. It's about smart decision making. Steve, I don't know if you're able to stay with us for the Q&A in a few minutes, but this feels like an intriguing area where Rudy may have trouble accessing this from the standpoint of the infrastructure money that would be a part of that calculation of the overall flow. Alberta Health, because you're centralized, has the option of making those capital calls, whereas Rudy would have to get together with the Ministry of Health to make that work. So we will have questions in a moment, Divya, about what relationships you may have, for example, with the province of Ontario around if you're going to be dealing with deferred maintenance costs that would have been invested over 20 years and you can bring it all up front. How is that all going to work? But we'll come back to that. Let's step along to, if we may, and yes, it was well done and very clear. Thank you. Mike, let's step on to you so that forgive us for adding this little label onto it, carrots and sticks, but the carbon cap feels like the beginning. And we know, talking to a number of government jurisdictions, that at some point doling out money and encouraging people ain't going to be enough to get to where we need to go. So what New York City is doing is of great fascination. And again, thanks for taking the time to work with us here. And I got your slides ready. If you could just tell me when to step forward.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. This has been fascinating. And one of the mantras that I've been working under for a number of years is steal shamelessly. And, I find that that's something, we're all in this together. And yes, we do need to work together on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so local law 97 has been kind of used as the general name for the raft of laws that is the Climate Mobilization Act, which came out 2 years ago on Earth Day. But 10 years prior, we had benchmarking and then the energy audit and retro commissioning requirements. So metrics became common. At Northwell, we started also at about the same time doing a comprehensive carbon footprint, because some of our hospitals are in the confines of New York City and then the surrounding counties. So we tried to start developing our own internal benchmarks as well as how they align with New York City. Those laws became the foundation of the metrics that were the Climate Mobilization Act. About 35,000 properties over 25,000 square feet were utilized for the benchmark data. Now, specifically, the Climate Mobilization Act has the raft of acts, with green roofs and solar PV being mandatory for large construction and/or new renovation projects. Building labeling, and you'll see on the next slide what that building label looks like. And this, yes, thank you. This goes to the metrics understandable by the board, as Penny had mentioned. I believe that that energy efficiency rating on the front of every one of our hospitals, this is among the roughly 30 hospitals, not-for-profit hospitals in the New York City area. That's Northwell Health, New York Presbyterian, New York University, Mount Sinai, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Montefiore as the primaries. Almost all hospitals have either a C or a D on the front door. So that's one element of the carrot, of the stick rather. The way the metrics were derived go to the left-hand side of the slide and that bell chart, bell curve. That 35,000 properties that I had mentioned were parsed. Some of the information, some of the elements were removed, but what remained were this bell curve, roughly standard distribution. And as you can see, and we don't know exactly where that 20% came from. It seems to be a relatively arbitrary number, But it's important because that 20%, the red side, became the 2024 threshold for what the stick will be. And so that number, that 0.02381 tons of carbon per square foot, which equates to roughly 380 kBTUs per square foot, became the limit for hospital properties, the classification being industrial. At that threshold, if we have any value above that threshold, we are paying a fine of $268 a ton. For the Northwell system, that will amount to $5 to $10 million per year average across the next 15 years, commencing in 24. If the entire facility is classified as that I classification. I'm on a couple of the rulemaking committees with Local Law 97, and we are now going through the process now to justify why a hospital in its entirety should be classified as a hospital, as opposed to a hospital on some floors, business occupancy on other floors, a cafeteria which might be classified as a restaurant on other floors, locker rooms as gymnasiums. So there's a big push right now to justify that were it not for the hospital proper, we would not have all of those adjunct needs. That is very, very significant because the fines would probably double if we subclassify the facilities. So that's a piece of the rulemaking that's going on right now, among a few others that are kind of important to the healthcare facilities folks. Another side is distributed energy resources. Many of our facilities have cogen plants, but because it's on-site combustion as opposed to source emissions, there are also enhanced penalties. So another one of the rulemaking aspects is to identify on-site generation in a more favorable light, because it has extremely significant ramifications as the electrification speeds up. So there's a couple of carrots and sticks in there, and the electrification piece in particular. New York is a very, very unique state in the 50, and in that upstate New York has an incredibly low classification in pounds per megawatt hour, the lowest in the 50 states, roughly 250 pounds per megawatt hour compared to an average of about 800 countrywide. Downstate, that value is closer to 1,000. So a lot of our clean power from the form of the Niagara and Messina dams, as well as a lot of upstate wind energy, is upstate, but we do not have the transmission necessary to get a lot of that power downstate. So that further magnifies the stick in that the penalties in New York City are enhanced because of the 93% dirty power that we are using. So there's a lot of dynamics in play here. And I think we need to learn a little bit from what I've been hearing this morning, in that our New York City Climate Mobilization Act is somewhat at odds with our New York State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and also somewhat at odds with our federal plans. So the collaboration is one of the things that we are working with in our government affairs and advocacy groups. So with right here, the penalties then, if we could go to the next slide, start to create the justifications that we need. Now, as I mentioned, we've been doing carbon footprints for a dozen years. And one of the things, initially it was just us doing it in isolation. People didn't really understand what we were speaking about. It's a different language that facility folks speak that is now becoming the common language. But so we put together this dashboard of our existing conditions. And the idea behind the dashboard is to start to inculcate the 75,000 employees into what we are doing and how they can assist in energy awareness. You know, the first part of the what we call the hierarchy of energy needs is awareness. We all need to be a little bit more aware of how we're wasting our energy. So that awareness in the form of sustainability dashboards, energy treasure hunts. It's something that the EPA has been promoting, and our local utilities are assisting us in energy treasure hunts, identifying the simple to the more complex in our systems. So, but we've started to categorize our approach, and Kaiser is always in conversation as leading in the states. So we try to steal shamelessly from some of the initiatives that they've been working on, and from that hierarchy of energy need. You know, we're working on the simplest, which is sometimes not too simple, but from the energy side, it's the lower hanging fruit, the LEDs, the steam traps, those systems. You know, then we move on to operational projects where there are very good payback. Now, this is where some of the carrots come in. The utilities have been providing incredibly lucrative incentives. The numbers have jumped dramatically over the last few years. One particular example is we're looking at a heat recovery chiller at one of our sites. It's a relatively small unit, it's only 125 tons, but the rebate is $970,000. And I think the identification is really hitting that if we can manage the heat and cold, both, you know, the thermal energy inside the building in a more effective way, that is by far the largest energy conservation measure. It also becomes very challenging in older buildings because every single one is unique, and quite often we have to modify through a hybrid approach existing systems, legacy systems, into newer systems, air source heat pumps. We're now designing a brand new building, 14-story medical office building in Manhattan, which will be all electric. And, you know, my background working in a power plant for a number of years, all electric's kind of scary. But you know, because can a heat pump manage below zero for sustained cold periods? But you know, it looks like, yes, we are ready for that technological move. With a tight building envelope, we can do that. So this sustainability dashboard identifies exactly where we are. We have one of these for every single hospital. And that dial, I noticed a dial, I think it was in Doctor's report presentation, where we show, even though some of our hospitals are not in New York City, we're using the same metric. We're trying to drive all of our hospitals to that same threshold. And that dial in the front and center indicates where we are, where the 2024 goal is, and where the 2029-30 stretch goal is, with the initiatives, the ducks and bunnies that quite often catch attention for folks. Now, the next slide shows the tactical and strategic plans for moving toward compliance. You know, as indicated, we will be paying $5 to $10 million a year. The 24 threshold, not so bad. That's going to be more in the $1 to $2 million range, but we're looking to avoid that. So each of these tactical and strategic plans we've developed with estimates to cross that threshold with the yellow line being the 24 threshold, with our baseline far left being a bit above that threshold. And then as we drive down the usual suspects, all our ECMs from retro commissioning through lighting and LEDs to the boiler controls and steam insulation, the things that we've been doing for decades, maybe just because it saved money, maybe because it was the best thing to do. But now that stick of $268 a ton is also a carrot. we are using that $268 as justification so that we can buy a chiller aside the scanner, that both of those make sense and that we can justify it equivalently. And it's been very effective. We have quite a number of chillers that are 5 separate hospitals with new chiller projects that are ongoing this winter for spring start. And this is one snapshot of one of our hospitals in New York City, where in addition to that chiller upgrade, we're looking at the heat recovery chiller, the furthest right bar. And that's a small heat recovery chiller. We're in failure right now of our old air source heat pump that serves the ORs. And were we to go with a conventional unit, that blue bar would be most of the way up to the adjacent one, the fuel cell microgrid. So the heat recovery chiller has an incredibly disproportionate positive value, that if you could see that 830 tons of carbon reduction per year. So what we're seeing here, and it was kind of a surprise to me, thinking about rooftop units from the past, they weren't necessarily the best. We always liked the water sourced units and the large central plants, but I've become an advocate for decentralizing, for using heat recovery. We're looking at decentralized boilers, electrifying boilers, something that would not normally be in discussion. We have an electric boiler plant at one site as a trial. So a whole new world, and the law has created some very, very positive outcomes in forcing us to reduce our energy consumption.
This is excellent, Mike. Thank you. Because ultimately, this idea of economic levers is going to be everything, and some of those, as you say, incentives help. Caps and fines, they help in a kind of odd way. Nobody likes paying fines, so they're even more powerful, arguably, than working through the heat recovery chiller. I don't know if you're able, or any of your colleagues are able to join us for the low carbon central plant session after lunch, but the idea that it has that big an impact is no surprise to us. And I think some of your team might be interested in what Headwaters is exploring. And you're right, the amazing amount of heat that is rejected from a hospital facility right through the heating season, that is by far the most economical piece to reclaim. So lots to learn there. But so let's step along, and for both Divya and yourself, I certainly got a number of questions. We will check in with the audience, but given the clock, I think it's quite likely some of those conversations will continue well after the forum has taken place, and encourage everybody to keep the Q&As coming, and we will respond to them again, either right at the end of the session today, or on an ongoing basis going forward. We obviously are still in touch with Mike and with Divya, and we'll keep rolling. Let's step along to Natural Resources Canada and Mark, and I know you have a kind of brief summary, and we will, and I suspect that your Office of Energy Efficiency is going to be in the crosshairs of the increasing activity and the increasing support that the federal government's able to offer over time. But Mark, we really appreciate you taking the time today to give us an overview of what's available to people right now, and how they connect with you to stay in touch as Greening Healthcare will, as things evolve over the months and years to come.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. And yeah, we're hopeful too. We have requested additional budget for some of our programs because we've been getting really good results. So fingers crossed to additional funding coming in the future for more programming and to sort of extend that scope. So hello, everybody. I'm Mark Lalonde. I'm a program officer with Natural Resources Canada. And being in Ottawa right now, I'd like to acknowledge the unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. And sort of interestingly enough, Ian, you mentioned earlier that in our previous conference or our previous presentations this morning that money is not everything. It's knowing what decisions to make and what key decisions to make. And here at NRCan, we cannot agree more with that statement. Here we have lots of resources and knowledge on how to get started and steps you can take to sort of improve that energy efficiency and to go towards a right program for your institution. So do you mind going to the next slide there? Thank you. So I'm not going to go through the whole details of the Paris Accord. Everyone knows the PCF along with the net zero by 2050. So through those two initiatives, we've sort of narrowed it down to 3 or 4 main programs or resources that we can use to help not only hospitals, but also institutional and commercial buildings meet that net zero goal. So I'm just going to quickly go through these, being time constrained. I'll just, if after this presentation, anyone wants more information, my email will be at the end, and I'll be glad to answer you directly as well. So right now, in terms of funding for hospitals and for commercial and institutional buildings, we do offer funding for the ISO 50001 program. Quickly, it's an international standard where it's an energy management system that tracks, analyzes, and improves energy efficiency. And so right now for that one, we do have a call for proposals coming in probably fall 2022. There'll be a lot more details in terms of eligibility and what type of application you could submit. But generally, ISO 50001 adoption is inexpensive. It can be implemented quickly. And so far, what we've seen from projects in the past couple of years is that it produces results immediately and generates pretty good ongoing savings. Now, currently, that is our only funding we have for hospitals right now. But we are, like I mentioned, hopeful that we will get additional funding in the future. Now, how much or for what? Of course, being in government, that could change, election to election, right? Or it could even change from day after tomorrow, depending on priorities. But we are hopeful to get money to sort of expand on helping groups move towards the net zero 2050. So in terms of resources, we do offer a wide range of training, technical references, guides, and webinars on sort of how to help organizations start making those right decisions, as well as getting the knowledge to make those crucial and key decisions within your organization. So one of the first categories we've determined it was codes and commissioning. So quickly, I'm pretty sure most people here know what commissioning is, but pretty much it's a low cost, short payback alternative to expensive retrofits. So it's quick little fixes or things that you can identify to lower costs and lower energy use. And currently for building commissioning and existing building retrofits, we do offer a guide, advanced training, as well as commissioning resources. Additionally, because of COVID, we know that hospitals, one of the key things that may have been affected or that may have sort of changed because of COVID was HVAC systems, right? There could be less activity at the hospital. There could be a fluctuation of activity. And so we created an operational guide, sort of like a self-evaluation tool and guide on how to optimize your HVAC system. So it's a tool and guide that provides feedback on the impact of your HVAC and helps create strategies during and following pandemic. And so currently, the next one was codes. And so right now for codes, our major work is that we're supporting code development for new buildings, as well as for existing buildings. So right now what we're doing is that there's going to be new codes and guidance that are going to be released in 2021, or the announcement of we're pushing for new codes and new adoption of codes by 2030. And part of that major work is also to help harmonize codes for provinces. Because right now we can help and support the provinces to sort of implement the updated codes, but right now we're trying to harmonize codes so that it's the same throughout the country. And so right now these codes are being made with keep in mind that the push for, of course, net zero by 2050. So these new codes will sort of give you new guides on how to move towards getting that net zero goal. So, and then next program, I'm just gonna go quickly. So it's benchmarking. So benchmarking is one of the key proponents, I'm sure most of you know, to managing or to better understand your building and energy performance. So we offer support, and we also offer the use of a tool, which is Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is a free tool to help benchmark your data. And so right now, hospitals, those that are deemed to be in the top 25 percentile, so 75% or more of a score, can be eligible to be certified Energy Star Portfolio, or Energy Star certified, pardon me. And so to help with benchmarking, as well as to help with hospital specific, we do offer specific resources for benchmarks and best practices for acute and extended healthcare facilities, as well as a guide for energy managers and finance officers. And then lastly, we know that the federal government might not offer the most funding right now, but we do recognize that provinces and even different organizations might offer funding for specific things. So we do have an interactive guide and financial incentives tool where you can log in, and it's fairly up to date and can keep you up to date on different funding opportunities per province. So it's like a one-stop shop for your energy efficiency. So you go on that link and you can find pretty much funding for everything from your boilers to HVAC. I mean, there's multiple different resources there. And the last thing we like to work with, or we like to promote, is knowledge and education. So again, knowing how to make that decision, or the knowledge to make that decision, as well as internal culture, is very important steps for an institution to take towards energy efficiency. And so 2 ways we promote that is through free training. So we've partnered with the Canadian Institute for Energy Training, CIT, where we do offer quite a few free online courses to sort of help not only inform decision makers, but maybe also you can use to help inform culture or inform people who work at the hospital. And lastly, at NRCan itself, we do have technical guides. We do have webinars of speaking of ISO, speaking about codes, speaking about multiple different aspects, and including everything that I mentioned in this presentation. So the email right there is the one that you can contact us if you have any questions, comments, if you want PowerPoints, if you want webinars, or even we have a very skilled team of engineers who specialize in our programming and who are always willing to help if you have questions about programming, if you have questions about any resource, or even if you're saying, heck, we want to look at a retrofit or a sort of commissioning project, can you help us? Our engineers are always ready to help. Send it to that email and we'll be glad to answer your questions. So that does it for my presentation. Thank you, Ian, for having me here. NRCan is ecstatic to be at these presentations, to be able to promote our knowledge and our resources and our funding. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. This is very helpful, and I know an evolving story over the coming years, because the government has a number of levers they can pull to make things happen, and I think your office is going to be right in the middle of all of that. Michael, quick, I'm conscious of time. Quick reality check around the Q&As. Can you, do we have some that we might consider
I think there might be two quick ones that they're both directed towards Divya that you might be able to answer. One
Okay.
was regarding the long-term care centers and if there's any idea of when funding would be available for those sites. And then the second was the thought to add COVID-19 mitigation through HVAC or other modifications to the eligibility criteria.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you for the questions. The LTC question is a harder one to answer, I think, as I think we just need to wait for the market to settle and codes and standards to settle. Typically, CIB is not set up for financing buildings, but as some of these codes settle, then I'm sure LTC will become a part of energy retrofit. So it's a matter of time and working through what's happening in the industry. So we'll keep in touch, and Kim, happy to always, if you want to just keep in touch with me, and I'll let you know as we hear more. With regards to the second question, it's a really good question, but I think something to remember is CIB's initiative is more for energy retrofits and energy related retrofits, and primarily because we're looking to get repaid through savings in energy bills or not create an additional burden. And as a result, the addition of COVID mitigation is not a part of our criteria. It's just not, we're not allowed to provide funding for non-energy retrofit aspects for buildings. So that's, I think the approach should be is, if we free up a little bit of your capital by helping you do the upfront on energy retrofits, maybe some capital that you had put aside for energy retrofits can then be used for COVID mitigation, and therefore we can achieve two goals by doing one, but something to think about.
Thank you, Divya.